nice headphones.
I can see a dog in the background.
That's right. Sign of a modern office.
Ah, he's about to jump on the sofa.
Look how badly behaved that dog
See, he's
is.
so naughty, he doesn't realise he's been watched. He thinks your back's turned and you can't see him.
Okay, should we start, Phil?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're expecting a few more people to join us, but we record these sessions. So we we like to share the kind of burning questions salespeople have, and we use it to kind of promote a wider sense of community. But thanks for joining. If you got any questions at all, please, put it in chat, or we can unmute your microphone. But it's a great opportunity to throw questions to Phil. And if it's anything like our last session, the questions really do range in depth and breadth. Whilst you do that, a bit of context for today's webinar. We're so excited kind of to speak to other sales professionals and to hear about what's on your mind. We have a whole hour spare. So if, we can take up the entire hour, but if we get through the questions quickly, then obviously we won't keep your time for longer than necessary. But really, the purpose of this is we want to keep building a community of sales professionals, and we want to try and engage with as many people as possible. So we are doing these AMAs every month. It's actually, we get quite a bit of feedback post AMA, because my colleague Eddie, uses this content and promotes it on socials and things like that. So it really does spur a kind of an engaged community. Please tell colleagues and friends to join if you see that there's value in taking part in these. Eddie's going to put a URL into the registration form in chat. And again, just trying to build up this sense of community. If you're interested in joining it in a more of a formal capacity, please do submit your details to that, and you can be part of the early adopters as we kind of drive to grow a community of sales professionals. We have, like last time, been sent a few questions in advance to this webinar, but perhaps I can kick things off if that's all right, Phil.
That's fine.
So this is quite a challenging question, but I enjoyed receiving it actually. The question is there a difference in the way Chinese lead organizations than in the rest of Europe?
Well, it's very interesting you should ask this question, Will, but one of the people that I was involved in when I did my doctorate all those years ago was a guy called George Yip, and he's written quite a number of interesting books on the topic of global account management. And he's been a professor at London Business School, and then he went to a business school in Rotterdam, and he's now based out of America. And he is about to publish a book, not a book, an article in Harvard Business Review, based on some research that 3 academics have done on current leadership practices, specifically contrasting Chinese leadership styles with those that we are more used to seeing over here in Europe and the USA. And a very short sort of outline of some of the findings of the research is quite interesting, because we speak on our master's programs about Julian Birkinshaw and the post-knowledge era in which we're now living, where the leadership characteristics of successful organizations are kind of based around managing what he calls adhocracy and democracy. And I think that some of the findings that George Yip is coming across is that the Chinese management systems, particularly of their large global kind of businesses, lend itself very much to operationalizing adhocracy in quite an innovative way, where they distribute autonomy and power to smaller units of decision makers throughout their organizations and can therefore affect change more quickly. So I think what's going to be interesting, and I don't know the details of the research that's done, but I'm rather intrigued and will be intrigued to sort of learn more about this because, of course, it's always interesting to compare and contrast different approaches to leadership, from region to region, from culture to culture. And I think that I think it's going to provide an interesting addition to the work that we're all already familiar with Dr. Julian Birkenshaw's work on sources of competitive advantage. So, yeah, I think there are differences, but it's mainly around the way that they approach power and adhocracy.
And for those that don't know, maybe it'll be useful to define what you mean by adhocracy.
Yes, academics have got this knack of coming up with words that we're never quite sure what they mean. Adhocracy is looking at structures of management which come together in a ad hoc fashion, which source teams of people from across different functions of a business to be able to affect a more agile way of working. And it's very different to the more hierarchical structures that we've been used at in the past. And it's very akin, if you like, to this whole concept of agile leadership and being able to create structures and processes inside organizations to be able to make decisions very quickly and effectively. But I think what China are doing, according to Professor Yip's research, is affecting that adhocracy change perhaps more efficiently than leadership practices that we currently see in Europe.
It's really
Slightly
interesting.
slightly academic, isn't it? This start of this AMA, Wills, but
Well, it actually goes into it segues quite nicely into the question I had for you, and I always like to put you under the spotlight when I have
right.
this opportunity. So, so as we know, kind of productivity has been in the news quite a lot recently, especially in the context of UK's productivity not really being where it needs to be, and we kind of, if you read around it, we haven't really recovered since the 2008 financial crisis in comparison to other kind of G7 countries. And then I looked at the latest Harvard Business Review journal that we subscribe to, and the leading article in that is all around busyness, but it's all around productivity, really, is how do you ensure productivity? It sounds to me, from what you were saying about Chinese leadership styles, they are operationalizing adhocracy to become more productive workforces. And so, okay, if that's the context, my question is, how can managers ensure a more productive workforce? And perhaps you've already addressed part of this.
I
Maybe
might
we
have
should be
done, but
following.
are we talking generally or are we talking about sales specifically? I mean,
Well, in the context of myself, in the context of sales.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not an economist, so I don't quite know what goes into the way productivity is calculated, but it's clearly been an issue, certainly for the UK, for for quite some time, maybe 15 maybe 15, 20 years, that there's been no discernible improvement in the productivity of the country. Um, and this is of some concern for the economists and also the politicians in terms of how we drive GDP for the country. But one of the things that doesn't get mentioned by politicians, which makes me question what are the levers that are used to measure productivity, is the role that sales has in driving productivity. It kind of makes sense if GDP is a reflection of the gross domestic product that is being generated in the country, that one of the levers for driving GDP up is going to be sales and revenue. And if that's the case, then why isn't there more being spoken about it in political circles about the role that sales play in driving productivity? If we can sell more, if we can, well, we hear about it in the sense of exports, and if we can export more, we'll become perhaps more productive. And but as a general word, we don't hear politicians use the word very often. If we can sell more, it'll improve productivity. But it's a big topic in sales. I mean, we quite often hear interesting statistics about the percentage of sales force that meets quota is often quite low. We often hear that it's as much as 60% of a sales force doesn't hit targets. And so if you look within the domain of sales, there's got to be huge opportunities to increase the productivity of sales force by the way in which we might leverage technology or leadership in order to drive higher performance. And I think this is a big question that sales leaders need to be concerned about, in my view, which is how can we get more from the resources that we have available in order to meet kind of revenue growth objectives or revenue objectives, kind of moving forward. But I think there's all sorts of ways in which one can start to explore areas to be more productive, but it's a huge question for us. I don't know if any of
Sorry,
the
it was
other.
a bit too broad, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, one thing you mentioned or you touched upon is around time management, and having an idea about maybe you can comment on where do the most successful sales practitioners spend their time, and what kind of activities do they what are the most high value activities that a salesperson can do if there's only a set amount of time that we all experience? How should they be structuring or prioritizing their time?
I mean, there's some quite interesting research done around, where do star sales leaders spend their time versus those that don't reach targets, or sort of don't perform quite as well, with their team. So if we start by just looking at the leadership kind of angle first, then the kind of areas that star leaders tend to spend more time than average sales leaders is going to be around strategizing, territory planning, territory management, making sure that the plans are properly in place. They'll spend much more time working with their salespeople in early sales cycle opportunities, and not just be there for salespeople at the when deals are due to be closed. They tend to spend more time coaching their sales teams rather than proper coaching, as opposed to sort of micromanaging around spreadsheets and data and statistics. So there's been quite a lot of research in terms of where managers need to be kind of spending their time. When you start to look at the data of how much face-to-face time do salespeople spend actually talking to customers, it's quite low. I mean, it varies from sector to sector, and one must question the amount of non-productive kind of admin time that sales teams seem to be spending their time on. And a lot of that's driven with a micromanagement attitude of the leaders to whom they report into. So yeah, I mean, depending on which level we're talking about, there are different levers that can perhaps be pulled and adjusted. But I think I'm most excited about the role that some of the emerging technologies will play in making life easier for salespeople to get in front of customers and to spend more of their time doing what they should be doing, which is obviously selling to customers.
Yeah. Philip agrees. He's just put into chat, planning is a key area for greater productivity in sales. I also suspect that many companies don't know where their star performers / leaders spend their time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, we don't come across much current data which goes into this analysis of where time is being spent. It tends to be research projects that are carried off maybe once every 5 years or so. We start to see what the stats kind of tell us. But I agree with you. Yeah, Phil, it's not often that you find organizations are really closely monitoring where sales managers spend their time. On the master's program that we run, we get managers to actually bring to us the data of where they spend their time. And that for us is a regular source of information, and it becomes a debate that we have with the master's cohorts about where they spend their time. And we link it, the data they produce, to some of the research we've seen in the past, particularly produced by Gartner. And we also link that kind of where you choose to put your time is influenced by your values and belief system. So it also links for us around, what is the purpose of a sales leader? What kind of results do they want to achieve for their team? How important is it for them to achieve results from everyone in their team moving forward? But yeah, there's probably an opportunity for us to do more up-to-date research in this topic, actually, through our students.
Yeah,
That's a great point, Phil. Thank you.
I think we should. I just wanted to pick up on one more thing you said, Phil, which is around, you're really excited about what technology can do to kind of, I guess, enable salespeople to, referencing back to the productivity, I guess. But have you seen anything recently that you are starting to realize the impact it could potentially have for salespeople?
Well, I don't know if I can name any sort of specific applications, if you like, but I mean, one of the ones that we're beginning to see a lot of value from is IntraHive, which actually measures relationship capital. And the kind of data that we can get from using IntraHive is enabling us to recognize the network of contacts we have through organizations with whom we deal. I mean, I think, Will, you can probably speak a lot better on this subject than I can, because you're much closer to the data. But the kind of example you gave earlier in the conversation about Luke meeting up with Lucas was an interesting one, which is perhaps in part influenced by IntraHive. But this is just one piece of quite a large jigsaw puzzle. You've got the ability to look at sentiment analysis in conversations to perhaps give you a better feel of the propensity of buyers of products to buy. You can get better data around probability of sales cycles using those kind of technologies, which are available. And I think that all of these technologies, whether it's HighSpot or HubSpot, and in terms of being able to direct your marketing campaigns in a more focused way, all of these are there to enable salespeople to become more effective. And I really am looking forward to the time when the systems are built around the salesperson rather than around the sales manager so much. I think it's if you can make life easier for salespeople to sell, that's got to lead to better productivity.
Mm.
And for mm, you know, and as a consequence of that, for managers to spend much more time looking at data and trends to be able to spot, when you look across the sales organization where salespeople perhaps can be better directed or where best practice is happening with a number of your salespeople, perhaps not with others.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we're going to see a really interesting advancement of technologies that are built specifically to enable salespeople to sell more.
So I was very unhappy that we've got this question submitted to us.
Oh,
Um,
what's that?
that Gartner research in 2021 said that 72% of buyers want a sales rep free experience. And in 2022, Gartner research says it's now 83% that B2B buyers would prefer ordering or paying for a service through digital commerce. How, as a salesperson, should I react to this? And how does it influence in the way that I sell now?
Yes, it's quite interesting, and I think if you dig deeper into that research, I think that it also shows how the age demographic is influencing some of that data. I think I think it's millennials who are much more digital savvy, and they prefer that kind of method, perhaps, of doing their own research online and not engaging with salespeople. So how as a salesperson should I react to this? And I think that it's not altogether kind of negative in a sense. If it's possible for buyers to buy solutions without having to engage with salespeople, I would have thought that that's not a bad thing because you're meeting the needs of those buyers through a particular type of channel, which means that the sellers can spend more time, perhaps more quality time, focused on customers who do want that interaction, uh, who do want those kind of relationships. I think I think what's interesting is that in a world, and we've talked about this quite a bit in the past, in the world that's changing very quickly, buyers don't always have the answers. And the only way they're going to find answers to particular problems that they have is through a heightened sense of collaboration, and both with people from within inside their own companies, but also with suppliers and partners. And this is where I think the role of salespeople is going to sort of develop much more strongly, sort of moving into the future. That the kind of skills that are going to be required of salespeople, given that there may be fewer opportunities, are going to be the more complex skills of problem solving, collaboration, co-creation. Um, so yeah, I think as a salesperson, how should you react to this? I think that salespeople, need to kind of read the tea leaves. They need to look for ways of adding more value to the conversations that they have with customers. They perhaps need to be slightly more. The word is that's being used is disruptive. They perhaps need to be more proactively creative in the way that they suggest ideas to customers before they start thinking of finding solutions to problems themselves. So
Mm.
I think it's going to mean that sales are going to have to work harder, to earn their bonuses and their commission, because they're going to have to add a degree of sort of intellectual acumen to the way in which they go about selling, and not just wait for the orders to come in, but actually to go out there and find them and make things happen. But I think those that do crack that particular code are going to be enormously successful.
Yeah,
Um, I don't know if I've answered that question, but yeah, I think there's an interesting statistic, isn't it?
it is interesting. And um, McKinsey came out with some interesting insight into what is the sort of how customer expectations are changing, and therefore what are the skill sets required for salespeople.
Yeah.
Um, and we've actually, recently we did a podcast on that, um, and it's interesting because customers' expectations are as such that they expect a salesperson to be a fantastic kind of problem solver, and also, have information to hand at their fingertips, because they're already coming into the conversation with a degree of knowledge around what it is you do.
Mhm.
And so all of these kind of elements, I think, add to the the competency levels of what is expected for a salesperson. And I think that's going to become more and more complex and more specialized, perhaps.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. 100%.
Yeah, yeah,
Be interesting to get kind of Philip's viewpoint maybe on some of the trends that he's seen, or whether the data that Gartner's kind of produced is consistent with Philip's experience. Because I know, Philip, you're very knowledgeable in this area, so I'm putting you under the spot here.
No, that's okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah, Philip, nice to speak to you again.
Yes, likewise. Yeah. Well, I'm just wondering how aligned that statistic is, in fact, with the Forrester research on death of a B2B salesperson, because that was what, 5 years ago. And they were predicting that people would be, if you were in that box of providing a more of a transactional sale, then basically your job was under threat. You had to get into the top right hand corner.
Yeah.
Can't remember what the axes were, but you had to be in that consultative piece. You had to be, as you say, spending more time helping the customers with more complex issues rather than the transactional. So it's really just played that out, and maybe that's what's reflected in that data. But it's interesting how our technology has definitely helped, because I remember back in 2003, 2004, when we were first doing remote selling,
Yeah.
and the customers just weren't interested. And it was
Mm.
really hard to get them to engage with our centralized remote sellers. And in the end, we ended up allowing the sellers to actually go and visit these people once a quarter, which is sort of against the whole model of the principle.
Yes.
But now I think it actually makes sense. Customers are quite happy to do that. It is much more around the transactional thing. The technology is there to support them, but it's the customers who are the key drivers for that. I think it's, to what extent are they willing and able to be sold to through these mechanisms that are being developed through leveraging the technology. And COVID has obviously accelerated that process massively.
Yeah.
So that's a key part of the change.
Yes. Yes, I was very surprised at not work data that we've seen from some of our clients, like you say, who've introduced the sort of an inside sales role to sell up to sort of 500,000 kind of euro dollar deals. And so anything above 500,000 would be dealt with by the field sales force, but anything below 500,000. And to me, that seemed quite a high figure. To what extent are you able to close quite large value deals actually without any face-to-face contact? Was that the kind of scenario that you were just referring to, Philip, where you're talking about fairly large value deals?
Yeah, absolutely.
Handled
So
by an inside sales team. Yeah.
definitely. I mean, back in 2003, 2004,
It's a long time. That's 20 years ago.
That's 20 years ago, but they were reasonably large deals, but it was really hard to make that work. And there was a massive resistance among clients. I don't think it happens now. I think the other piece of research that is out there, I'm trying to remember who it comes from, is the fact that the greater propensity to buy virtually and be happy with that also comes with the caveat of there's a greater chance of buyer remorse, and they'll regret the decision they made. So I can't remember what the stats say, but there is a significant
Yeah, wow.
increase in buyer remorse, which is aligned to that whole
How interesting.
remote buying.
I think we should look into that. Will, buyer remorse.
Yep.
I think it's also a Gartner
Yeah.
stat.
Okay.
That's in the similar sort of study.
Yeah. How interesting. I mean, what I've also heard in sort of connection with the sort of role of inside sales, and I remember in the early days when perhaps not 20 years ago, but so you're starting this journey quite some time ago, was that sort of they went from this phase of it being a real struggle, like you say, to it now being more widely accepted by customers. But often the sale is supported by a channel partner. So sort of not looking towards the necessarily the field salesperson working direct for the, let's say, manufacturer, but actually working much more with different channel support people in order to close some of these slightly more larger and more complex deals as well. And I think that kind of, in a way, that kind of makes sense economically, isn't it? Because the cost of actually sort of running very large sales forces is so high that working more effectively with channel partners in assisting some of the more complex sales kind of makes a lot of sense. I don't know whether you've had any experience with that, Phil, at all.
I haven't had a lot of experience with channel partners, but I do know that it's an area where a lack of transparency and a lack of sharing of information really does hinder the whole process. And so a reluctance either within an organization or with the partner, the reluctance to share what you know about something definitely holds you back. I think the good companies that were doing that, in my experience, were certainly the technology companies, surprisingly, would collaborate with each other in order to sell to us at the company I was at. And they would share what they know about the organization. They'd have joint account plans for how they would bring ideas to us. But I don't see everybody being as transparent. I think transparency is key there. There's got to be an awful lot of trust, obviously, when you're sharing that information of yours. So there's, if we go right down to the fundamentals, trust, transparency, that culture has to be there as the bedrock for greater improved productivity and sharing.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Thank you, Philip. Will, so we come back to you unless you want to ask some more questions around the topic. Or...
Well, I'm just seeing chat. Lucas has said that he believes inside sales is just going to become huge over the next 5 years. Lucas, if you're there and can hear me, it'd be great to kind of understand what your perspective is.
All right. Thank you very much for unmuting me. So I think it's a very, very interesting topic. And I think it's something that's very commonly spoken about, particularly in the last, 2 to 3 years after the impact of the pandemic. Not only because perhaps people have changed in the respect that they may sort of feel more comfortable speaking to people remotely. But I think now people realize that actually getting the time to, have a salesperson in the building and have all these discussions uses a lot of people's time. So I think what I find in my role in an inside sales team is that there's actually a lot of respondents, people are very happy to speak to me online. And it might be that you can customize and tailor the experience to the customer. So if they've got a really important project that they're doing and they've got quite a complex facility, for example, it might be that you go and visit them for that sort of introduction. You touch palms, you shake hands, you introduce yourself. But there is a lot of potential for almost solely online interaction from my experience.
Yeah.
Lucas, would you mind sharing which organization you're working with and what your sort of role is?
I work for a company called Siemens Digital Industries. So we're the industrial side of Siemens. You know, we're not necessarily the microwaves, the ovens that you may have heard of. We're
Yes.
more sort of anything that will automate a factory.
That's fantastic. And you work at the moment in an inside sales role, and you're on the, I think, level 6 B2B apprenticeship program, the sales apprenticeship.
Certainly am.
Yeah, that's great. So you see a strong future for inside sales. How do you mind me asking, sort of up to what level of responsibility, do you have in terms of deal sizes when you are sort of talking to customers?
So, you know, I listened to that statistic earlier. I think somebody mentioned that inside sales might deal with deals up to 500,000. So some of the size of the accounts that I manage and sort of communicate with, they did big, relatively big figures last year. You know, some well over 1 million, well over 2 million, some projects. So it really depends on sort of what they're doing in terms of what I'm doing, but it really links to what the other point about sort of collaborating with other areas within your business, other
Yeah.
integrators, other partners, and it's almost a bit like a snowball. The more you uncover in the discovery phase,
Mm.
the more sort of that will come with it. But it can stay in inside sales if that's something that we've developed as a team, opportunity wise.
Yeah. Very interesting. Well, you've been sort of brought up in a way in an environment which has had to be inside sales, hasn't it? Because we've not been able to go out and travel and visit, customers until more recently. And so in a way, this has been am I right in saying this? Perhaps the majority of your experience in sales has been in this sort of environment so far. So you are naturally talented in this area. Whereas those that haven't been used to it may be more, struggling to deal with this way of selling. I don't know how you see it, Lucas.
I totally agree with that, actually, Phil. I think, I actually don't really know any different than sort of online interaction, other than the odd few customers that I might have visited for various different reasons, or right at the early
Yeah.
days of my apprenticeship when I'd perhaps go with another account manager to shadow.
Yes.
But predominantly, I'd say probably 99% of the meetings that I've hosted or led with customers have been online. So it is really sort of all I know, I guess. I think when we started doing video calls, I was actually still in sixth form. So it's something that,
Right.
I've gone from being in a classroom trying to learn, I don't know, psychology or business studies, to actually using to develop business with customers. So it is really something that's almost sort of natural to me now.
Yeah.
It's great to have you on this session, Lucas. We need people at every level of sales. From Philip. How long have you been in sales for, Philip? I suspect it's quite a long time.
Well, since the day of faxes,
Since
or
the
before,
day of
I should
faxes.
say before faxes.
That's right. I mean, we've seen quite a bit of change, haven't we, Philip, over the years? So,
Yeah.
but we have these. It's just great to have these different perspectives on the AMA.
Yeah.
As well. Yeah.
It's
Okay.
interesting to see how the kind of skills and competencies and expectations and so forth changes over time for a salesperson.
Yeah.
Because I think as things progress, so do the skills of salespeople too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what's required. Okay, well, Lucas, do you have any questions for Phil?
You're going to
Well,
put me on the spot, Lucas.
It's great, actually. So I was actually driving for the first half of this, and I was taking a little bit of a think about some potential questions,
Right.
and I didn't really know how big to go, because obviously you had some questions right at the start about how business is done in China. I thought, I'm perhaps going to ask something more sort of, I don't know what I'd call it, micro sort of question in terms of, I don't know, stress in deal management, for example. So
Yeah.
I'd say one question that I really thought of when I was driving, Phil, would probably, I know it's probably quite a difficult one to answer. If you're amongst a team of other sales members, what do you think is something that you could recommend to sort of encourage sort of shared motivation and collaboration and sort of almost achieve one goal in the team, i.e., how do we sort of deal with people that want to pull different ways and have different sources of motivation?
It's a really good question. I'd love to know why you want to ask the question. I mean, for me, I think one of the key areas for pulling people together is around a strong sense of purpose in a team. It's like, what is the North Star of the team? And this is probably something to do with maybe more a kind of leadership function, but it doesn't have to be the leader. It could be something that's collaboratively put together. And we've seen examples of sometimes quite high performing teams go through periods where they've not been high performing, and maybe even over a year, over a couple of years, fall into a rather, what's the word? Slightly cynical, kind of individualistic kind of approach to how they do business. Not necessarily a particularly happy situation to be in. And there are, various techniques, I think, that could be deployed to try and switch people's mindsets into something that's more positive and more joined up. One is having the sense of purpose and agreeing to that maybe collectively as a team. Another technique which is so powerful because it's such a positive force of energy is something that we call appreciative inquiry. I'm not sure if you cover that on level 6. Just as a methodology of being able to energize the best of what a team has and build on it to do something even better. And we've seen that the process, if you Google appreciative inquiry, you'll get the kind of frameworks that support. They're very, very simple frameworks, but we've seen these techniques used, and back to what I think Philip was talking about, it sort of fosters a much more sort of collaborative, joined up energy around, okay, how are we going to take this team forward. I mean, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because you can relate this also to to the way a coach of a football team is able to take a team that's underperforming and completely transform its performance. I'm quite keen on cricket, which is probably not a sport that most people kind of link into, but if you start to look at what's happening to the English cricket team at the moment with the new coach, Brendan McCullum, and what Ben Stokes is doing, it's quite extraordinary. So you're getting this incredible performance out of basically the same players, but through a very different mindset and attitude. I think this, this is it. This is, if you like, the secret ingredient is this ability to be able to get people to believe in themselves, to give people a sense of empowerment. And you can only really do it when people have got the right skills in place. But for me, there's sense of purpose, collaboration, appreciative inquiry. These are all tools that can help foster what we call a growth mindset. And that would help. So I don't know, Lucas, if I've given you any, a reasonable answer to that, but I was really glad for the question. Have I missed anything, Will? Is there anything?
I don't think so, Lucas. I really loved that question. I think so many people can relate to that, and I'm trying to think about the answer I would give as well, or if I could add anything to Phil. And one thing we get taught in the masters is around really trying to get a deep sense of understanding of everyone in your team, kind of understand what their perspectives are, what their values are, understand what we call the currencies as well. What are the pressures that they're facing? because from a position of understanding, you can then start to kind of develop a more of a collaborative approach to what Phil has just described, using tools like appreciative inquiry or kind of working towards a collective purpose, I think is really, really powerful. But the thing I would start off is just really get a sense of understanding.
I wonder if we could direct the same question to Philip, because I think, Philip, you've had the benefit of working with large organizations and multiple sales teams. Do you have anything you could share with us when back to Lucas?
I think all your comments are spot on. I think it is mindset is fundamental. Can the manager is crucial to making that happen. And there are people who say a sales team is never actually a team; it's just a collection of individuals going in the same direction. Maybe to an extent, it is, but you have to give them that direction, as you say. That what is that vision or the general objective for them? And I think that's a critical. Leadership is critical in getting everybody to work together, setting the framework, agreeing the parameters, the storming, norming, forming approach. What are the rules for this group of people to work together to be the most effective they can be, whatever their ambition is, whether it's commission or promotion or just keep a job. You can cover all of those by great leadership and drive them in the same direction. So mindset is fundamental, but it's the leader who's going to drive that.
What are your thoughts, Lucas, on what's been shared back to you?
And obviously there's a wealth of knowledge and different perspectives in this call alone. I think a lot of it we can think about in terms of simple breakdowns of human personality and psychology. I'm sure many of you will have done a Myers-Briggs personality test, and within sales teams you'll have people on every sort of area of that spectrum, and everybody's going to have a different sort of main source of motivation. People are going to react differently in conflicts. People are going to change the way they behave, all subconsciously. But I think you're totally right in the respect that there needs to be some kind of establishment of almost why everybody's in that group, what defines the group, and then having a leader that can drive and sort of empower everybody in the process, almost like planting a seed, like you said, Phil, to sort of foster a growth mindset. Yeah, I very much agree with all of that.
Great.
Yeah.
How are we doing on the questions, Will?
No, I think that's it.
That's it. Right.
Yeah. So
Great.
you survived your
Survived
second,
my second one of the year.
second one of the year. So we'll
Thank you.
organise another one for the end of March. But thank you, Philip and Lucas, for joining us, and we hope you found
it's
that
been great.
useful or insightful.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Cheerio. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a great week.